All right, hey, this is Doug Pagitt, and this is Chris Haw. Chris is the author of a book called From Willow Creek to Sacred Heart, rekindling his love affair with Catholicism. Something like that. We are in Philadelphia at one of the Simple Way houses, and there's a bunch of people also in this room with us, and that's the ambient noise that you hear. All right, so Chris, we talked in the first segment here that you have a particular view of Christianity that says that Catholicism represents the community that has held the church and the scriptures in custodian and cared for them, even approved what would be in the scriptures. And so the Protestant idea that the Bible is the authority of God and not the church, you differ with that idea greatly and would say you can't have the church, you can't have the Bible have an authority without the church, because whatever is in the Bible was only given by the church, so the Bible has its authority because it was given authority by the church. So if you want there to be an authority, it can't be strictly the Bible.
Yeah, totally. I mean, to me, that would be a really honest epistemology. It's saying that why would I trust these scriptures if I distrust all of the other things the church made, like purgatory or its other councils or its doctrines? Like, if you distrust those, why wouldn't you distrust one of their documents?
So a lot of people have been taught in Protestantism that the Bible existed before there was the church, that it was a product of early Christian community, and then Catholic Church formed later. And so the Bible wasn't formed by the church. The Bible was written by followers in the 1st century and 2nd century. And the church then later codified that collection of books, but didn't generate it, didn't make it.
Yeah, that's just simply not like the history as we know it. For example, like if you want to look for hierarchy, it doesn't just show up like post-Constantine. It shows up like before the book of John is even penned. You have people like Saint Ignatius, who's considered a church father, saying things like, we shouldn't have Eucharistic gatherings unless overseen by a bishop or a episcopoi, an overseer. Wow, well that seems very hierarchical. But what they were doing was they're saying, well, this is not a clique.
Yeah.
This is a visible, concrete community that is going to be based on concrete people and not personalities. It's going to be based on persons authorized by Jesus. And so this community developed and had structures that were very viable and active.
And you like the idea that there was a centralizing community, not multiple communities, not multiple expressions of Christianity.
Oh, there was multiple, yeah.
So then isn't the one that you're suggesting, an Ignatius kind of community, just one of them, and there were others that didn't hold to those assumptions. So help me understand then this view. If there were multiple communities all over the Mediterranean that had different kinds of authority at the time, different rationale for how they were going to be organized, different practices, different cultures and different blendings, why does this one that maybe kept itself going longer, why does it now get to claim some sort of authority just because it's been around longest? If at the time it wasn't the only one then, why does it get to be the only one now?
The Catholic position is that it's numerous things being held together in a composition. That's why we need 4 Gospels and not just one.
Yeah.
Like, uniformity doesn't mean, that's not what Catholic means.
Sure, yeah.
It means on the whole.
But aren't you calling for a Catholicism that has primacy over the Christian story and primacy over the Christian artifacts, or orthodoxy and scriptures and so on, that it didn't have in the first 200 years, 300 years?
It's certainly evolution. I mean, that church structure of having a visible, very obvious college of bishops and a president that has Petrine authority, that's not super duper evident in the 1st century. I mean, people still argued with Peter, but they thought, we need to argue with Peter.
Yeah.
Like in the First Council of Jerusalem. I mean, that's a council. That's a church council of ratified, authorized persons.
Yeah.
They even call it a council.
We would now call it a council.
But they had
the
to
Bible
call
headline calls. I mean, the Bible category topic
Yeah.
section calls it council. But anyway.
But they found it necessary for that church around the Mediterranean to harmonize as a collective, as a college of
I would suggest, and I think you want to suggest differently, that there were some who wanted harmonization. They've continued the drumbeat of harmonization over the centuries, but there were others then who didn't want harmonization, who thought that diversity and difference of opinion and continuous difference of opinion was the important thing to have. Is that fair?
It's almost the exact opposite. Father John Bear, an Orthodox priest, is really good at talking about what we call the heretics weren't the champions of diversity. Like, look at Valentinus, Marcion, Donatus, for example, just for three major heretics. The Donatists, what they're saying is, our vision of what a real Christianity is much more pure than what we have. And it should be seen as a sort of myopic movement that is really a puritanical prohibitionist movement.
I would grant that. But now you're in 3rd century, 4th century struggles, not in early centuries.
Okay, well, just take Ignatius's example of we shouldn't have churches that aren't overseen by the successors of the apostles. Now, that apostolic succession, that sense of we are a community of that has authority derived from Jesus' apostles. Whether that's fabricated in the text or not, we have no access to. But the point of that is saying this is not cults of personality. If you don't like the priest's sermon, that is not enough of a reason for you to say, this place sucks. I'm going down the street and I'm going to start my own Eucharistic gathering. In that situation where somebody says, I need to break off from this crappy priest, at that point they're becoming the myopic, anti-diversity person. You see what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah. I agree with you that, and I think that's a great argument you make in the book. From Willow Creek, to Sacred Heart, is this idea that you want to live inside of a larger community that is nurturing life and faith, and not one that is a life of faith, and not one that is excluding the rest of the family.
Yeah, so, in many ways I see the Catholic as the more generous.
As the more generous one.
Not the more uniform.
That's great. Okay, so let's say we grant that. Let's say we say, okay, the early church did organize in a particular way that became consistent in the stream that is the Roman Catholic Church now. So I want to, if we don't have that argument right now, and I say, okay,
or
I think you're
particularly
right.
The Catholic Church, which includes the Roman and 21 other Eastern rites within it that are in communion with the Roman See. It is 21 churches in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Which is important. They're Eastern rites.
Yeah.
Like they're.
I was just trying to contrast them with the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. That's a footnote.
Okay. So that there's a stream that's consistent. If I grant that, for the point of this conversation, that's okay. We won't have that argument. It seems to me that you're also arguing in the book, and you do this well, that Protestants don't get to claim the Bible and exclude everything else from the church. So I want to suggest that there is a way to have a faithful Jesus-following life that has no canon at all. So rather than arguing about which canon, is it a canon that has a pope? Is it a canon that has a 2,000-year community? Is it a canon that only has the scriptures? But it's actually possible to have a Christianity that doesn't function with a canon. If a canon means an authority outside of the community that has greater impact and greater force and can't be negotiated away by the decisions of the community. So in other words, it's not contingent on if people think it's an authority or not. People don't get to say like, we're just going to get rid of the Bible or we're going to jump to it. So it has an ontological existence. It exists apart from, it is an authority apart from if people recognize it as an authority or not. Is that fair? Is that a fair description of canon?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. It's a composition of a collective authority that's been created over time, and it continues to evolve.
And people don't get to decide. It's not like a social agreement like you and I in this conversation where we're doing this together because we both agree, like, hey, this is kind of fun, we'll have this conversation, and this is mutuality of ideas. And we're just going to decide how long we should go and how long we shouldn't go, and it's just up to us. There's no canon here. Right? A canon would be an authority that exists outside of the two of us that we are going to live in relationship to.
Yep.
And I would suggest it's possible to have a kind of Christianity that doesn't have any external authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be it the Bible or the church or anything else. But there's a kind of Spirit of God amongst us all, bringing about temporary and only what is agreed upon authority. And the scriptures and church history are useful and beneficial for training in righteousness, but they don't function as an authority. They function as encouragement and beneficial life.
Yeah.
But tell me what's wrong with that.
I mean, for one, it's almost very undemocratic. Like,
yes,
Catholicism, in a way, is a sort of democracy that includes the dead.
Yes.
It says we can't just make decisions based on those of us who happen to be walking about.
Yeah.
There is this wisdom that's collected over time that we need to be in conversation with.
Yeah.
We need to be able to be informed by certain developments that have accrued over time. So, to me, one of the real problems here is that, everybody says you can't escape death and taxes, but everything else you can escape. Mine is the entire reverse of it. You can escape taxes. I know plenty of people that avoid taxes. People in this room avoid taxes.
Yeah, I can name them right now. We can point to them.
And ostensibly we have the person that got the better of death. But everything else, culture, religion, tradition, authorization, canon, structure, hierarchy, all of those things are constructed. Like take
all constructed, right?
They
don't exist, but they don't exist. They're constructed by.
They will be constructed. So take an anarchist.
Yes, but they don't exist. Let me caveat that for a moment. Yes, they will be. They will be created, but they're created by the people who are living under those rules, and will go away when those people say we're no longer playing by those rules. So you can have a football game and have a referee, and all the players defer to the referee. But after that game is done, the referee doesn't come to your house and tell you how to divide up, your chores. They're no longer following their rules, the rules that they're there to enforce, because they only exist inside that context. They only exist inside the world. They're contingent authorities, as opposed to non-contingent authorities, which canon seems to me, for it to have any meaning at all, has to be non-contingent.
But see, there's no non-contingent things. And that's where it's like, you're always called this postmodern person, but you're looking for a non-contingent authority. Or you're trying to avoid authority by saying so many of our authorities are contingent. They all have historical rootings and.
No, I'm not diminishing them because they're contingent. I'm cheering them on because they're contingent. They're temporary. By contingent, I mean temporary, as opposed to they exist by their own power outside of our decisions if they should be powerful or not. So I think the Bible
is a contingent.
The authority we choose to give to the Bible should be negotiated by communities of people as they live under it. And they'll decide who's involved in that community. Those living now, those living in the past, some of them, those they're going to live in the future as best we can anticipate will be meaningful to them. Like, we're just going to negotiate that. But the Bible doesn't have any authority that we don't give it.
Yeah, we definitely constructed the Bible. And in a way, anybody that wants to sort of draw from that version of Jesus kind of has to enter into dialogue with the people who made that version of Jesus.
Okay, so if that's your argument, then why does the Catholic Church not live under the authority of those who canonized the First Testament, the Old Testament? Because that wasn't canonized by the Catholic Church. That was canonized by the Jewish community. So if that idea were to hold up, then I can't say, well, if I'm going to use the Bible as something beneficial for my life, boy, the only way you get that is to buy the whole package. Why? How can the Catholics get to do that with the First Testament, when it wasn't canonized by them. It was canonized by the Jews. And there's no access to the Jewish community that did that canonization. So why do the rules get to change with the 26 books of the New Testament to all of a sudden be like, hey, the only way to use that
text
is
through this interpretation.
Is through this system.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem, unless you're going to say that there's two different canons, the Old Testament canon, the First Testament canon, and the Second or New Testament canon. What? So it seems to me that everybody's always constructing the authority that's going to make the most sense to them. I would even push, and this is where you and I agree, I would push on the Protestant problem in the same way, which is, you don't get to use the Bible like that.
Yeah.
I would actually agree with you. If you want to use the Bible like that, your rationale's got to be better than, I don't know, the people of my tribe have always said that it has authority. Like, you got to have something more than that to claim that this book functions by a different set of rules than everything else in all of creation.
Yeah.
That's terribly intriguing to me. But I don't think that you have to buy the system that has claimed proprietary ownership of it when they're the only ones when others are also claiming ownership of it. That's where I get lost. So help me with that.
Well, I think one of the things that is maybe lost in this kind of dialogue about the authority is one of the goals of all of these authorities, which is to try to create a global unity. Because for me, that's one of the aims, is not just that we can all follow Jesus together, but that one of the essential aims of Christianity is to create a global community. And a body. And so it's not just about following Jesus, so we can do sort of Gandhian pacifism, which is great. But there's other aims in the New Testament besides loving enemies and serving the poor.
Yeah.
One of which is to construct a community that is international. But here's the difficulty, is how would one organize such a community that it could have sort of international focus, which are, that's some of the red letters. They're aimed at unity. So the question is, how would we construct a community and a unity throughout the world that would have some kind of coherent structure to it? And my point is, all of my anarchist friends and all my grassroots organizing friends, they still want to create global community, and they say, but it just won't come through these kinds of authorities. But they always end up constructing new authorities in different ways. The anarchists still have canons that they construct. They still say, well, we have a canon of saints in anarchism. Yeah. These people interpret anarchism well. These people, so we ratify or construct these things throughout time. So that's one of the unavoidable things.
So, but what is it about global unity that is better if it's built around
visible sacramental connections?
Yeah, that.
Mm-hmm.
What? Why is doing the same thing or coming under the same banner, why does that equal global community? Because if that's all it is, then you just find whatever thing it is that already exists in every community and say, that's the thing that unifies us. Like, if it's I mean, how is it meaningful if it's just sort of the obligatory commonality?
Right.
Like, why isn't it breath or something? So it's because it seems to me that what you're arguing is brought about by forced coercion, in the sense that there's no other way you can be part of a Christian community other than through this. There's just no other option. That's it. So that doesn't feel like it's actually going to generate unification. It feels like it's going to generate sort of capitulation.
Submitting to something, I also think, is one of the things that none of us can escape from. And I think collectively submitting to something is one of the things that gives us unity. So in an anarchist community, they always create a structure eventually, which is called consensus minus one, which is some jerk that is going to hold up the process. We have to make a structure which says you can't hold everything up. So even submission happens even in the most egalitarian and open communities. And to me, so much of this modern desire is to kick the can of submission down the field. And the reason I mentioned submission here is like when I've met other Catholics or other people that have gone through certain rites of initiation, we have this sort of profound connection on we both had to submit to that. In other words, we don't have a direct relationship with each other. We have a mediated relationship through something else. And that's what Bonhoeffer says is there's something very dangerous in us having direct relationship with one another.
See,
unless it's mediated, unless it's mediated through something. Mediated through, we are mediated through the fact that both of us, I don't know, in a Girardian sense, both of us killed God. Like, let's say that would be what mediates our relationship. So both of us kind of walk into each other, not with this sort of bravado of machismo that we are each these strong individuals separate, but what draws us together is a sort of mediating glue. And to me, that's one of the sacramental unification questions, is we become united by a shared submission to X.
See, and I would argue that what's required is mutual submission to one another, not to a third party. So always you have to mutually submit. And this, I would argue, is of the Christian essence. And not exclusively the Christian essence. Other systems have this essence too. But it's mutual submission to one another, not bravado, and not submission to something else. And that's what by default connects us, is that we have this other thing in common, but that we are living in mutual submission to one another.
Yeah, but see, that presumes that nothing really defines that submission. It's so vague to say what we just need is to just love one another.
No. You got to drop the word just. It doesn't apply that. It means that you and I have to figure out what mutual submission is. We don't get a third party to tell us how we need to, what it means for us to submit.
But see, Christianity says the party that shows us why and how we submit to each other is Jesus.
Yeah,
we didn't come up with this idea to submit to each other. A form, a historically contingent person, an example, is what starts this conversation of mutual submission. So we submit to each other in Christ. Or
I would push a little bit that it's maybe not started with Jesus, but Jesus was also submissive, as were others in the story of God as told through the Christian narrative. Abraham submits to God. Adam even submits to God. Jesus is also one who submits to God. I don't think it starts there. I don't think the notion of mutual submission is a Christian origination. I would suggest so.
Maybe so. But one of my big things here is this kicking the can down the street.
But that's what I think
submitting.
you're kicking the can down the road by having the third party. So that's interesting. So tell me how that's not kicking the can down the road by saying, look, I don't have to submit to Chris. I mean, I'm not. Chris isn't my God. I submit to God, not to Chris. How is that? Or I submit to the church, not to God. How is that not essentially kicking the can of submission down the road? Isn't that what dismisses and diminishes a person's engagement with the other? That it's really not about you. It's really about my commitment to the church, or to God, or to something else, or to the Bible. But I don't know.
I mean, to me, what I asked my friend Jonathan, isn't being mediated to one another through Christ kind of like, it's offensive when he says that? And he stepped back and he said, there are forms of mediation that are clarifying. He said, take glasses, for example.
Yeah.
To say it's dangerous to drive without the mediation of clarity is to say something clarifies us. And so for anybody listening, if you're still with us.
They are.
Oh, there.
People have pulled their cars over because they can't concentrate on driving any longer.
In this in the Girardian reading of Christianity that what mediates our relationships is that together we tortured God to death or something like that.
Sure.
We now become safer with one another because, I mean, I have friends who say, shouldn't we practice open communion with each other and pushing against the closed communion of the Catholic Church? Shouldn't we practice more communion with each other? Because in Middle Eastern practices, everywhere I travel in my peacemaking trips, breaking bread together, i.e. that mediating practice of breaking bread, means, if nothing else, we don't kill each other. In other words, he's saying we need the proliferation of this mediating activity so we stop killing each other. It actually helps. It clarifies. And I think that's amazing. But my point is there's always going to be conditionality in certain forms. Like, to play a game means submitting to rules. Like, we can't play soccer unless we submit to the rule of no hands.
Sure. But when you're done playing soccer, you don't carry that over to the rugby field or the football field or the golf course.
Right. But
that's what I'm trying to argue, though, is that we're always living in contingent submissions, not in permanent and universal systems of submission. It's always negotiated in the moment. And I would argue that, look, our mutual submission is not to one another, is not limited from the submission we have to other things as well. There's layers of this. So I think you're totally right to push back on the idea of, well, that's not all there is. We also have these other common submissions. So it's a whole layered, complex system of giving up ourselves in the service of the other.
Right. But see, here's where I really turn to is your vision to me seems more parochial because it says, I want smaller communities to really construct the truth out of the soil. And I understand that because I believe truth in a way is constructed out of the soil. I think the Bible is a construct of the tradition. But the more democratic or liberal position would say, truer truth, ask any scientist, means heavier and more expansive peer editing. Like, the truer something is, the more aggressive and more in conversation the peer editing goes. And so that's why some people innovating on, like, well, I think I know what Christianity is. It involves the purity of the church. And you go, okay, wait, I have a few red flags because I actually am in conversation with history. I don't want to turn into the shithead Donatists because we don't want to turn into prohibitionist Puritans. So the purity of the church thing is good, but you have to be in conversation with the global. So to me, there's a certain parochialism to your broad universality because it shrinks our conversations only down into small communities.
Well, it can, but it doesn't need to. I would suggest we're better off when the community that we engage with for knowing how one ought to live, the best way to live, should involve our local experience, our global experience, our historic experience, as long as all the pieces of the authority structure play by the same rules. The problem I have is not the size, it's when one authority element plays by a different set of rules that can't be negotiated with as the others can. So it gets to the point where someone says, well, you can't change the history of the church. It just is. You gotta live with it. No changing it. It's not me saying this. It's the Bible saying this. So it plays by a different set of rules and nothing you can do about it. That's when that turns into, I would say, all the time, necessarily power and not submission. So as much as I want the person to submit to one another, I want the church to submit to the person. And the system of canonization, in my view, cannot allow that because that established static authority cannot interact with the current day. So it's imbalanced, and the imbalance is thereby.
I mean, to me, the notion of having a council is the exact opposite of that. It says,
sure, we at the time, but 500 years later, we can't talk back to the council. Like, I'll tell you, if I could have interrupted the council in Nicaea for a moment, I think we could have had a better conclusion. But my voice is cut out, and now I have to live under the conclusions of those people without them living under the input from me.
Right.
And that's what I would say is a power problem. It would be my critique of any canonization is that it's a codified authority that doesn't have to play by any other rules.
I know. I mean, it is sort of fixed once we canonize something. But see, here's one of the things that's good for me. I'm sure our listeners are like, who the hell are these people?
Well, let's come back after the break. Let's take a little break because I want you now to say, because fair enough, the two fellas disagree about this thing.
Yeah.
But I want you to testimonial as to why that move has been positive for you.
Sure. Okay.
So I don't want to be saying a canonized Christianity is bad. I think there's always a power problem. It's never solved. But I would like you to evangelize via testimony why this has been beneficial for you.
Yeah.